Our keynote speaker is Professor Chidi Oguamanam, who is Research Chair in Bioinnovation, Indigenous Knowledge, Systems, and Global Knowledge Governance at the University of Ottawa in Canada. He is one of the leaders of the Open African Innovation Knowledge Project, a key global scholar on this area.
I am coming from Cape Town, from Johannesburg. So it's been a very long journey for us, to say the least. We've been saying a lot of things about what is going on in South Africa. And I wanted to take some time because a few days back, it was Ian Curry, the counsel for the amicus curiae, who is appearing in court for this copyright bill challenge. He said, we've had all the practice, what about the theory? And today I'm going to answer that question. And this is how I intend to do it. So if you don't understand what the heck I'm talking about, please keep looking at this slide that I'm sharing with you. And let's run quickly around the traditional knowledge, which I describe as inherently and all-round borderless. And TK's defiance of epistemic borders is its reality. Before the current melding of all kinds of boundaries, disciplinary, conceptual, and a lot more, the idea of traditional knowledge is itself a colonial conceit. The qualification of other people's knowledge as cynically traditional presupposes the existence of an authentic or a default knowledge system. So the renewed escalation of interest and consciousness around traditional knowledge globally and on our continent has never been more exciting, as it is also troubling. TK is Africa's significant factor endowment, a very strong, even if less celebrated and less articulated and less harnessed continent's competitive edge. Its subsistence and survival in the digital age is now a stuff for our collective challenge. That is actually the very stone in our shoes. I propose that while there has been a remarkable shift around traditional knowledge, on the teleological realm, that is to say on the practical realm of things, we run the risk of undercutting traditional knowledge's optimal and enduring potential for our continent. We need to first, and I mean first, invest in theorizing traditional knowledge and in tackling the conceptual morass that saddles it. For the privilege of this intervention, I intend to sow some provocative seeds around traditional knowledge. First, do we ignore the epistemic conceit and the very erroneous assumption over the taxonomy of traditional knowledge that I've spoken about not long ago? Maybe yes, because of the inherent risk of red herring. If we spend a lot of theoretical energy quarreling whether it should be called traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge or all that stuff will be happening behind us and we will be losing steam. So second, do we engage the biggest elephant in the room, which is the scope of traditional knowledge? The last question unravels a very important opportunity. It requires a full consciousness at all times of traditional knowledge's defiance of conventional disciplinary boundaries. There has been consistent attempt to trifurcate traditional knowledge into traditional knowledge proper, traditional cultural expressions, and genetic resources. This trifurcation project is a signifier of colonial influences on our epistemic autonomy. In Africa and some non-Western civilizations, our knowledge systems, which for emphasis includes our languages, and we have heard so much about the power of language. Vukosi and a lot of colleagues are doing this, and Melissa on this panel. These languages are the windows to our worldviews. And those worldviews are fundamentally holistic, serving as a glue to our identity as a people, and also a lot more about who we are. So, the trifurcation project or approach is deeply problematic. it has the danger to condition our thinking and our approach to TK in ways that serve the pragmatic purpose of fitting traditional knowledge within established disciplinary boundaries and knowledge governance frameworks. Trifurcation is not only an exercise that happens at the World Intellectual Property Organization or the Convention on Biological Diversity or other places where traditional knowledge is on trial before Western establishments. TK has been subjugated to the characteristic inclination of Western knowledge systems, that is to say, Western science, to dissect ideas into their minimalist compartments and to erect artificial and often highly politicized disciplinary boundaries. And in the paradigm of pitting the West against the rest, or the rest against the West, TK is often profiled within these molecular epistemic models. The consequence of this tendency is the disembodiment of traditional knowledge from its custodians and its ultimate disempowerment as a knowledge system on its own merit and integrity. Here are a few examples I want to suggest. When traditional knowledge is framed around genetic resources, we are forced to pigeonhole it and to defend it in the courts and laboratories of the life sciences. This explains why we focus on TK in agriculture, TK in seeds, in health, in medicines, in pharmacology, ecology, botany, forestry, horticulture, and environmental sciences writ large. To further perpetuate the conceit in each of these fields or disciplines, TK is further devalued with the ethno prefix, if you know what I mean. Ethnobotany, ethno-horticulture. And what is this telling us? It is saying that this knowledge system has little prospect for scaling. But we know that the opposite is true. Similarly, when traditional knowledge is framed in the expressive repertoire, we locate it within the established canons of the humanities, the liberal arts, and aspects of the social sciences. In this compartment, we focus on traditional knowledge in entertainment, in music, in storytelling, in poetry, folklore, and in songs, arts and crafts, cuisine, gastronomy, and other miscellaneous renditions that fit within Western canons and disciplinary boundaries. But we know these things are lies because a piece of art is associated with a genetic resource through which you want to carve what you have done. And it could be a medicinal plant. And it could be a piece of religion or some degree of spirituality, all of them in one, wrapped as expression of knowledge, people, and their worldviews. So from the prism of the third world approaches to international legal studies, what we call 12 to international law, we see a highly dedicated international legal, political, and institutional orders and their municipal imitations invested in deepening the balkanization project in contrast to traditional knowledge's holistic essence. These powerful institutions, I would not mention their names, have carved out traditional knowledge in bite sizes, reflecting their politically positioned structures with nuanced jurisdictional contestation over aspects and parts of traditional knowledge in the guise of what I call latter-day TK protectionism. In these institutions, the interests of traditional knowledge holders are often subjugated to the institution's primary loyalty in the defense of their political and economic mandates. In trying to understand the fraught conceptual challenge around TK and its strategic weakening, the biggest evidence is the superimposition of alien knowledge governance framework over traditional knowledge. From Johannesburg to Cape Town, we've been quarreling about a certain concept called copyright. Now, the superstructure of knowledge governance is Western intellectual property. It was designed without regard to traditional knowledge and its producers. The international order has never given any serious attention to alternative knowledge governance model outside the Western intellectual property system. TK and its holders are summoned to the Court of Intellectual Property to plead its validity. Objections to this approach is symbolized by the marginal appeals to sui generis forms of TK protection. The sui generis pathway is consistent with the colonial confinement of other knowledge forms to the periphery. Intellectual property rights are cataloged into diverse, complex, and technical regimes commanding unique legal principles and criteria for rights allocation through, for example, patents, copyrights, trademarks. But categories of intellectual property are not closed. As new IP regimes continue to be created, existing ones are renegotiated based, guess what, on the political influence of innovation stakeholders. And this is one compelling example. In the past few years, there has been a serious traction for the idea of copyright in AI-generated works. And actually, we heard a very excellent presentation yesterday by Professor Ramika, I think it was, who really put some finger on this stuff. But we're talking about copyright for AI-generated works. But centuries of effort have yet to take TK seriously in the contestation over knowledge governance. Now, in the era of data, datification, digitization, machine learning, automation, and artificial intelligence, traditional knowledge's ubiquity and holistic outlook is vindicated. There is no how you can do all of this without, as Andrew was saying today, scraping data from all over the place. Digitization reduces all elements of knowledge, including traditional knowledge, to data sets. These data sets and the methods of their collection, translation, transcription, design, and deployment are now the next existential frontier for traditional knowledge and its holders' struggle for equity and information justice. This conference has touched on that complex dynamic, which many have spoken about already, from Johannesburg and now in Cape Town. A year ago, a coalition of like-minded scholars, thinkers, practitioners, and various stakeholders hermetically went to a place called the Cradle of Humankind. There, in the order of pretend hermits, they agonized on how to navigate the rapid surge of technological tide and its potential for good alongside the real and the present danger of undermining Africa and the global South's interest, especially in traditional knowledge. The result was the 2024 Cradle Principles, published March 12, 2024, soliciting for comments, and this was shortly after the conclave of pretend hermits. In a nutshell, the Cradle Principles on knowledge governance recognize the need for equity in the use of digital research tools in the pursuit of information justice to avoid a threat of colonial injustice or a repeat of what we call colonial injustice in the digital space through digital colonialism and exclusionary tendencies. The principles were proposed to avoid wrong uses of traditional knowledge and community-held knowledge and information. It also highlights the role of knowledge governance systems to protect fundamental human rights of knowledge producers and users through equitable dispersal of benefits and collaborative and sustainable forms of innovation. In the digital age, the Cradle Principles emphasizes the need, and I quote, to combat unidirectional informational resource extraction and misappropriation that aggravates inequities and injustice. A year in this technological age is like a decade in the old order. Since the Cradle principles, ChatGPT has taken the world by storm. Recently, as we have all heard, Chinese DeepSeek has sent those who thought that they were in the commanding heights of the AI rat race, scampering back to the drawing board. The game is on. The race is open. Africa must pursue and strive to recover. Now, these principles, that is to say the Cradle principles, are principles, and they are just guideposts that attempt to salvage and sustain enduring values amidst disruptive circumstances, in this case, technological circumstances. Now, a few thoughts and strategies to build further on the Cradle principles is what I will devote to the next few minutes talking about, especially with regard to the dilemma which these technological surges pose for traditional knowledge and our continent's interest therein. First, we must invest as a matter of inclusive disciplinary endeavor in the theorization around traditional knowledge on a more urgent scale than the present attempt to monetize and make everything about traditional knowledge about money. We must lay the foundation of our claim to traditional knowledge on a deep-rooted theoretical enterprise. Because if we settle for monetization easily, the money will go away, the data will disappear, our knowledge, our languages will be sold, and they will be extinct. Second, we must reconsider with intentionality a shift from our pattern of consumption of technology to making our roles as co-creators of knowledge, to taking those roles seriously. And I'm so excited about the Wikimedia Foundation and CISLOS and Co. and all they are doing in this space to begin to really take our ability to generate data and tell our own stories and share it on our own terms. So our participation in the dataverse, especially through the agency of our continent's youth board, must be designed as an exercise in the curating of a partnership for all-round collaborative innovation, which is what we do at the Open African Innovation Research Project. Even if we cannot, as Vukosi said in Johannesburg, even if we cannot match the hard technological infrastructure, we can effectively negotiate what we contribute to this for the optimal operationalization of these new technologies. So in this shift, we meld the troubled binary of producers and users of data. The miners and the mined in the dataverse can forge a mutually equitable interest, flipping and switching their roles in access, in benefit sharing, with self-preserving commitment to develop the ethical rubrics for sustainable and equitable knowledge production and governance. Third, recognizing the fundamental holistic orientation of traditional knowledge, we must, as we do in feminist legal studies, ask the woman question. And here we must begin to ask the TK question. Think carefully. When you take your camera, taking pictures, whether it's in a panoramic scale or however, whatever we do as new generation content creators, ask the TK question as a conscious matter. Because a lot of knowledge is being digitized in very accidental manner, but they can still be pulled back for meaningful renegotiation of what Africa brings to the table. So we must continue to ask the TK question and resist being mesmerized by the shallow disciplinary rabbit holes that have underserved and devalued traditional knowledge. Fourth, our cultural heritage institutions, and there's been a lot of that going on throughout this conference, must be empowered to effectively reinvent their role in the increasingly complex dynamic of digital creativity. they must reinvent to reflect the transformation in the value chain of traditional intermediaries and the advent of new ones that defy the reach of conventional regulatory tools. Our library should be more daring and not cower to the threats of IP lawyers, of which I'm one, and try and take this battle to the court of public opinion. And South Africa has a reputation, at least in the AIDS crisis, to take on this battle. And I know there are many lawyers to render free legal service if the need arises. Finally, the business model that over-empowered intermediaries in the creative enterprise is no longer fit for purpose in the digital age. The same is true to a very large extent by implication of the conventional intellectual property system that services that inequitable business model. I suggest that if the miner and the mined, talking about data mining, have equal stakes on how we use information for good, then it is about time we deconstructed and redesigned the role of all stakeholders in between, including most emphatically the intermediaries. This is indeed the hidden lesson in South Africa's struggle for a decent copyright law. And let me close by saying, despite how long it has taken to get this law, or we're about to get it, every effort invested in that exercise is not wasted because it has given us opportunity to think deeply, and we are most likely to recover the lost days and years by the time the bill is signed into law. And that might be different from those who may have rushed their own and gotten an outcome. All these struggles will lay foundation for expedited implementation of this bill. And by so doing, a lot of education is going on free of charge since this struggle. And that has some parallel to why it took WIPO several years, decades, before there is ever a treaty on traditional knowledge. Thank you very much.